Shalom and greetings, friends. Thank you for clicking on this video teaching titled, Is Polygamy Okay? Now, I'm not talking about is it okay in my eyes or your eyes, but is it okay in His eyes, our Creator's eyes? And does He condone it? Does He support it? Does it really matter to Him? And so we have to base our beliefs on what we can see in the Word here, the inspired writings that have been recorded and preserved all these generations, and seek revelation with His Spirit to go into this matter. It is a very sensitive topic. I realize that. A lot of teachers will avoid this topic because people have very strong opinions about it, especially Torah lovers and seekers, and even religions. There's different forms of even Christianity, such as Mormonism in the past, even more so than in modern times, that believe that it's okay, that it will receive blessings regardless, and there are people out there that say, hey, I love it, even women and men. But let's look to what our Creator has to say, and please don't get offended by what the Scriptures say and what we can be revealed to us, but let's look to what we can see. And a lot of people will just turn it off. If they hear something they don't like, they'll just turn it off, or make a comment on the video teaching, as I have with other video teachings, and not really listen to the whole teaching, and will make a comment in anger and even name calling sometimes, which I'll remove any name calling and really bad attitudes or comments that are going outside of what trying to search truth through the Scriptures. So if you hear something like that, please, and if you're going to make a comment, please listen to the whole video message. Try to understand me carefully to correctly understand me. And then make a comment if you feel inspired to, or if you want to make a comment on our website. I list that in the description of the video teaching. I encourage you to do so. But let's get right to the matter here. Let's get to the heart of the matter. Let's go to the Scriptures, and let's look to the Scriptures and the ideas and the teachings that people have that say that polygamy is okay. For example, people will say, well, there's no commandment in the Torah, in what many call the Old Testament, or even in the New Testament, or the New Covenant, Brit Hadashah Scriptures. There's no commandment saying that polygamy is adultery. It doesn't say that it's a form of adultery. It's never listed as a sin. And so people will conclude that it's okay in our Creator's eyes, because if it was, He would make it really clear. But let's look even deeper than what we see in the letter of the law. Let's look into what we can see in the Scriptures to try to understand what is His will. How has He designed it from the beginning? And what has He perhaps overlooked and not listed quite so clearly, but sometimes He lets us learn the lessons of our own decisions. And He doesn't try to stop us. He sometimes lets us learn the lessons the hard way, through the school of hard knocks, as we often say in modern times. And even parents will let their children make smaller mistakes, and mistakes that will teach them lessons. And as we say, sometimes our best teacher is experience. And experience can be our best teacher. So let's go to the Scriptures, and let's also try to understand that there are different commandments in the Scriptures, and even one that does involve polygamy. If we go to Devarim, or Deuteronomy chapter 17. And it says here in verses 16 and 17, it says, "But he shall not multiply horses for himself, nor cause people to return to Egypt and multiply horses." And then in verse 17, jumping down, it says, "Neither shall he multiply wives for himself, lest his heart be turned away, and multiply silver and gold for himself." And so people will stop here and say, well, it doesn't say that it's wrong to have more than one horse or one piece of gold. So therefore, it must not be wrong to have more than one wife. Just don't try to multiply and have a whole abundance of these things. And although that is what we see in the scriptures here, we need to also look deeper into the scriptures. Let's look to the fruits of polygamy, even among righteous men, because often even Torah teachers, Torah lovers, lovers of the scriptures, will go to these righteous men and say, well, look, they had more than one wife and God still blessed them. For example, Jacob, or his Hebrew name Yaakov, he had 12 sons, became 12 tribes, but there were 2 wives and 2 concubines among these 12 sons. And so let's look a little closer. Yeah, well, Israel was our Creator's chosen people, the firstborn son, as he even calls them. But we need to look back and realize the Abrahamic covenant is not the same as the Sinai covenant, although covenants have overlap and similarities, the Davidic covenant and the Noah covenant. And well, we can look at these different covenants, but in Christianity, most of Christians just know of the 2 covenants. There's the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. But there are more covenants. The Abrahamic covenant, for example, is unconditional. A genetic covenant with the descendants of Abraham, that his descendants would multiply throughout the whole earth and cover the whole earth, and all nations will be blessed through his descendants. As the stars in heaven, as the sand in the seashore, no matter where you go on earth with a clear sky at night, you see stars. Or whatever beaches and oceans you go to, there's sand, generally speaking, to show that even the descendants of Abraham are going all over, numerous. And as you can't even count the stars and the sand, we as humans just wouldn't be able to count it all. No matter what the skin color, no matter what the race, whatever place on earth, Abraham's descendants have gone there and even intermarried. And so we've seen his genetics in all over the earth. And that we can see even the most blessed nations on earth have Abraham in their culture. Abraham, his descendants, have intermarried. And no matter what culture you go to, eventually you'll find someone saying that they have blood that goes back to either Abraham or Israel or Ishmael. You know, and in Isaac, Jacob's name was changed to Israel. So let's get to that. Let's look at the fruits of these 12 tribes, or at least the wives and the concubines, and there was bad fruits. You know, Yaakov, or Jacob, only wanted one wife. He just wanted Rebekah. And he got tricked. He was deceived. And so people say, well, see, God didn't stop it. He didn't stop it, so that must make it okay. Well, sometimes, like I said, he wants us to learn lessons. Yaakov, he stole that birthright, but the birthright was promised to him. It was given to him by Esau. But he had, and also his mother, she, was the instigator in trying to be sneaky to get that birthright, but they should have trusted. And when we don't have that trust and faith, it's going to backfire us. Later on, the Creator is going to have trials and difficulties. He's going to let us make bad mistakes. He's going to let us get tricked and deceived. And but it's to teach us lessons. to teach us lessons that, we shouldn't be that way. And if we're this way, that's wrong, then he's going to allow other things wrong to come at us to teach us just how wrong it is. So Jacob gets tricked. He gets deceived. And he's got to live with it. And the Abrahamic blessing is continuing on through him, regardless. And the Abrahamic blessing, like I said, it is unconditional, regardless of all the other commandments, whether it be adultery, breaking any of those 10 commandments, as rebellious as Abraham's descendants have been, our Creator still keeps that covenant. But the Sinai covenant is a conditional covenant, because it's a covenant made between the people and the Creator. It's an agreement covenant. A little different from the Abrahamic covenant in that regard, because the people said, whatever you say, we will do. And so the problem is in the people, as we see in Hebrews chapter 8, because of fault with them, the covenant was broken. And so that Sinai covenant, not the Abrahamic covenant, the Sinai covenant, that covenant that they broke that covenant and that agreement. And so we can see that one is conditional. The Davidic covenant had unconditional promises to it, though. And David's seed, the Messiah, would come from that unconditionally, regardless of the rebellions of his children and the captivities and slaveries, with 721, with the Assyrians on the 10 tribes going into captivity, and also the Babylonians conquering Judah in 586 BCE. And regardless of all this rebellion, the Davidic covenant and the Abrahamic covenant continues on, and we even see that our Creator still blesses Yaakov, or Jacob, Israel. His name was changed to Israel. And so even they are not forsaken and lost, but they are going to be grafted back, brought back through the Brit Hadashah, the new covenant as prophesied in Jeremiah 31. And so we can see in Romans chapter 11 that they are not forsaken, that they're still going to be brought back, even though the certificate of divorce was brought upon, that the Creator had to stop the covenant with those 10 tribes, the 10 tribes of Israel, but not Judah. We see that in Jeremiah chapter 3 and verse 8. And you can go that on your own time sometime if you want. But we see the fruits of Jacob. We see let's look at the fruits of Abraham, having children through more than one woman at a time, as both these women were living. We have Sarah, the actual wife of Abraham, and then we have Hagar, a concubine. And so people will look at that and say, well, Hagar's still blessed and Ishmael's blessed. Well, let's look at that a little closely here. If we go to Genesis, or Bereshit, chapter 21, verses 17 through 21, it says here, "And our Creator heard the voice of the lad." This is referring to Ishmael, the son of Hagar. "Then the angel of Yehovah called to Hagar out of heaven and said to her, 'What ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for Yehovah has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad and hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation.'" Here we see Ishmael making a great nation out of him, and he becomes an excellent archer. And so we see the promises, a great blessing given to Hagar. And then we can even go over to Genesis 26 verse 16. And again, grace and mercy. Our Creator looks down on Ishmael's crying. He's innocent. He was just born into all this mess. And and he's out there in the desert with his mother, and it looks like they're going to die. And so this angel comes and rescues them, so to speak, and gives them a great promise of blessing. And so we see in chapter 25, in verse 16, these were the sons of Ishmael, and these were their names by their towns and their settlements, 12 princes according to their nations. So interesting, we have 12 tribes of Israel, we have 12 princes, which become 12 tribes and nations of Ishmael. Wow, it looks like our Creator is pleased now and a-okay with that. Well, again, let's look at the fruits. Look at all the fighting and killing and wars in the Middle East between the descendants of Ishmael, which we call the Islamic people, especially the radical Islamics, the Taliban and so forth. And also we see the Temple Mount where they have the mosque now, and then there's the Western Wall, and then there's Israel. Has been a nation since 1948 again. And look at all the turmoil. Look at the fruits of this. Our Creator is showing that He doesn't necessarily condone it. He doesn't necessarily support it. But there is grace. There is mercy. He still blesses Ishmael. And He tells Israel, see, the greater blessings we're giving to the true wife. Through the true wife was Sarah, had Isaac. Isaac had Jacob. His name was changed to Israel. So the greater birthright promises were still given to Yaakov. Esau didn't get the greater blessings. He goes on and he becomes an enemy to his brother Yaakov. Even in modern times, the descendants of Esau merging with Ishmael's descendants. And we will see in prophecy, this is not this topic, but we'll even forge into the beast at the end time. But we should not hate these descendants. We should not have a prejudice. But we should realize that the greater blessings were given to Israel. And our Creator says to Israel, if you keep my commandments and my ways, your enemies will love you. And if you don't, I am going to bless your enemies. I'm going to even stir them up to go against you. So, we can't hate them because the Creator is the one who is blessing them. When we are in rebellion, yeah, we better fear those enemies. But when we're not, when we get back to the covenant and the keeping of His ways, which please Him, which teach us how to love Him and love our fellow human beings, and even our enemies in the proper ways, then we don't have to fear our enemies. 1,000 may fall, read Psalms 91. 1,000 may fall on this side, 10,000 on the other side, and He will protect us. He'll put a shield about us, a seal upon us of protection. We don't have to fear them, but we should also try to reach out and graft them in. Now we have the Brit Hadashah, the new covenant, of bringing in Gentiles. And even our enemies can repent and be grafted in. As long as those enemies don't become, they got to overcome their anti-Semitic, whether they be Greeks, whether they be Gentiles, whether they be Ishmaelites, or whatever. They have to overcome that anti-Semitic prejudice and upbringing and realize that I want to come into covenant of the birthright promises through Abraham, the greater promises and the blessings through Israel, that tree, that olive tree, and even a fig tree, even in some scriptures, is compared to Israel. And that tree being grafted in, Gentiles, as we see in Romans chapter 11, are grafted into that same tree, not a replacement tree, not a replacement theology. Let's get back to the topic of polygamy here. The fruits have not been good with polygamy, whether it be Abraham, whether it be Yaakov, and even David. King David was a man after our Creator's own heart. And we can go to 1 Kings chapter 15 and verse 5. let's go to 1 Kings 15 and verse 5. It says, because David did what was right in the eyes of the Eternal, the Creator, and had not turned aside from anything that he commanded him all the days of his life. Well, let's continue here. Except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. And so in the matter of Uriah the Hittite, doesn't say anything about Bathsheba here, but it's, of course, that's included in the matter of Uriah. Uriah was sent to his deathbed early because of David's adultery. And David's trying to cover that up. And then we all know the story, and if you haven't, I encourage you to go into the scriptures and read the story in more detail. But, people will say, well, David had more than one wife. It doesn't say anything here that there was anything wrong with that. Well, again, it doesn't say anything about Bathsheba in here, but it talks about the matter of Uriah. And we also see that David writes this song after Jonathan is dead. And he says, there was love between him and Jonathan that was greater than any love that they had for women. Now, it doesn't say that some people think that they were homosexuals, and David and Jonathan were. Well, that's, again, not what, that's in if you want to go to 2 Samuel chapter 1, I believe it's right in the first few verses there near the end of chapter 1. But again, that we need to realize that anyone out there with more than one wife is limiting that intimacy, that bondingness, and that oneness that they can have. And we can go back and let's look. We're going to get to the Brit Hadashah here in a little bit, but a lot of people will just say, well, David here, and as I read in 1 Kings chapter 15 and verse 5. Well, let's also go to Acts chapter, Acts 17 verse 30. It says, truly, these times of ignorance our Creator overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent. Now, this topic isn't specifically pointing to polygamy, but there's times of ignorance that our Creator overlooks, and He shows through the fruits His will, and we can look and see how He has done things when He is doing it. For example, Adam, he took one rib, made one woman, and Adam had one wife. As far as we can see in scriptures, we can also see in Noah had one wife, 3 kids, and we see the ark and so forth. So we need to understand that even though our Creator has overlooked things and He doesn't make specific commandments and list them as a death penalty commandment, we can see that sometimes He lets us learn by the fruits. And even when we make mistakes, there can still be grace and mercy upon us. But let's try not to make those. Let's not just say, well, it's okay to do these things that are wrong. We've got grace. We've got the blood, so we can keep doing these things. Well, if you do, let me warn you that you are bringing curses upon yourself. When you justify going against His will, from what we can see in the scriptures here. Let's go to Isaiah. Here's another scripture where we see in Isaiah chapter 4 verses 1 through chapter 4 verses 1, we see here 7 women, marrying one man. And some people will read this and say, well, I guess it's okay. It's okay in His eyes. Well, let's look at this a little more carefully here. In Isaiah chapter 4, it says, And in that day 7 women shall take hold of one man, saying, we will eat our own food and wear our own clothing. Only let us be called by your name. Again, in marriage, the women generally take on the name of the husband. To take away our reproach. Now, why are these 7 women having reproach? Well, it's not a blessing. Let me tell you that. Let's look at the context here. Looking at the context, it's as a result of rebellion. Not just women here, but men. Men being slaughtered, Holocaust, through battle, through war, and so usually there's more women that survive in a lot of these things. But let's go back to chapter 3 of Isaiah. We see, say to the righteous that shall be well with them, for they shall eat the fruit of their own doings. Woe to the wicked, it shall be ill with him, for the reward of his hands shall be given to him. As for my people, children are their oppressors, and women will rule over them. O my people, those who lead you cause you to err. Watch out, those who are leading you may cause you to err. And destroy the way of your paths. So if they teach you it's okay to break that law, and these commandments of righteousness, of goodness, and holiness, be careful. You're going to bring curses on yourself. And this is what this chapter is talking about. It's talking about because the daughters of Zion are haughty and walk with outstretched necks, really proud, chin high and tall, and wanton eyes, walking and mincing as they go, like on a catwalk or something. They are just really proud of their arrogant vanity. And they continue to rebel, and God says He'll bring baldness on the men here, and branding, instead of beauty, slavery, and so forth. And then we get to chapter 4, and talking about the 7 women having to have one man. And so we see here, it's more of a curse. Polygamy is not a blessing. We shouldn't look at it as our Creator giving His stamp of approval or support of this type of behavior or doings. And although we don't see commandments, we have to be careful anyway. Look at the fruits. Look at the fruits of even righteous men, righteous people, women in the Scriptures as well as men, and so forth. And now let's go to the Brit Hadashah, the New Covenant Scriptures, because we need to realize that the New Covenant magnifies the written law. Not the oral law. Again, there's a difference between the oral law and the written or letter of the law. The oral law is what people say the intent of the law is, and so they bring their own interpretations. As the scribes and Pharisees wrote down the Mishnah and the Talmud is the oral law. But any of us can just come up with our own oral laws that are not really in the written law, and we try to apply them to our lives today. So let's be real careful about that. But our Creator and our Messiah, as we see in Psalms, as I think I quoted earlier, it says, I will worship toward your holy temple. King David speaking here. And praise your name for your loving kindness and your truth. For you have magnified your word above your name. So he even magnifies his written word above his holy name. And now his word became flesh, as we see, and was nailed to the crucifixion, to that post, to that stake. Many refer to it as the cross. He was nailed to that, but the written word was not